America with Jonas Wells and Matthew Dunmeyer. Matthew, honestly, this conversation, I guess, is more just to talk about how we got started with the podcast, our goals for it moving forward, just talking to our audience a little bit more intimately.
Absolutely. In terms of the name, Well Done America, you want to explain how we came up with that?
Yeah.
What some of the other ideas were?
We were just trying to come up with some kind of clever name. I think my original...
It originally was like, what was it?
I think it was just like the Sports and Culture Podcast.
With
Matthew Dunmeyer and Jonas Wells.
Yeah.
And we're both sarcastic people. Obviously, my last name is Wells. The last name is Dunmeyer. And so, at one point, we were just having a conversation, and the phrase "Well done, America" came up, and I think I came up with, I'm like, hey, wait a second, what if we just respell this? And so
when you first gave me the idea, I just thought it was steak, like being well done. But now it makes more sense in my head.
Yeah, that's fair. So there's nothing really special about it, except that's kind of how we see society right now, is like, man, slow clap for you guys. Well done. And hopefully, I think as we progress forward, I'm hopeful about the future. And so hopefully that slow clap can turn into actual clapping of, you know what, well done, America.
I feel like it tends to be better than media makes it out to be.
I would agree. We're in the most prosperous time, and yet people are so unhappy.
Yeah.
And that's sad to me. I try to look on the bright side, though I will very much admit that I'm a realist, lean towards pessimism in most scenarios.
I can't be.
But at the same time, I'm hopeful of the future. I think people will eventually be able to look at society and see, maybe that's where my realism comes in. You know what? It's not that bad. We're not doing too terrible.
We all have American privilege.
Yeah, we do. And that's not necessarily because we've been given any kind of advances in terms of economics or anything. It's the foundational principles that we all adhere to, and we all agree to adhere to.
Constitution.
The Constitution gives us the ability to do that. So, yeah. I started the idea by the entire website. I saw sports and politics. I enjoy them both. I see correlations between that. You hear that a little bit in the podcast. You see that in the writing. And as I got thinking about it, I thought, okay, who can help me with this? Because I started getting overwhelmed with the amount of work that I had, the amount of information that I wanted to portray. And honestly, I didn't have enough manpower to do it all myself. And so I thought, okay, any good podcast that I enjoy listening to, for the most part, has at least one co-host. So
Ben Shapiro is the exception.
Ben Shapiro's the exception. Mike Rowe is another one that I listen to, who does a very good job by himself. There are a select few that do very good jobs by themselves, but they also have a great team producing it. And I was doing my own production, writing, all of it. So I thought, okay, who can I find that I know and has the same level of passion and interest that I do? And your name came to mind. And so, I mean, the first time I met you was in class.
Great class.
Yeah.
Archery.
Archery class for a physical education credit for sport management. It's a 1 credit prerequisite to graduation. And so we both spent 2 hours together every Friday shooting bows and arrows and talking about politics and sports.
Yeah, the only thing that made it bearable, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. The hardest part of that was trying to get through the actual class portion. Not because it was a bad class, just because there wasn't much point.
Yeah.
But we digress. So
that was last semester.
That was last semester, right. And then we began thinking about, after I texted you and said, hey, I'm starting this podcast, are you interested? You said.
Oh, 100%. I was so excited.
Yeah.
I think what happened was we both were leaving class to go to Convo.
Yeah.
I had just gotten my government major.
Yeah.
And I told you about it, and then you texted me during Convo, and I was like, this is insane.
Yeah.
That sounds perfect. So I was very, very excited.
It was kind of just born from there out of love of both sports and politics, and then honestly social change and affecting culture and social fabric and morals, and it's greater than sports. Sports, at least in my opinion, and you can
very not important
input. Sports aren't necessarily the most important, but they affect people's passion in life. And if you can affect people's passion, then you can start to speak to them about other things too.
Yeah, at their root, they are grown men or women playing with the ball, usually. But there's so much more to it than that.
Right. And so, I mean, that's how conversations get started. That's how the water cooler conversations get started. That's from there, you start with sports, and then you move into the rest of life. At least that's how I grew up. That's where I started to really enjoy talking to people. That's how I would find connections. I started playing fantasy sports, and I started to be able to talk to people who really don't care about sports. But I said, hey, do you want to play fantasy football with me? And so I invited them into my league, and then I got to know them better, and they started to learn some aspect of sport, even if it's not necessarily being in-depthly, I guess, contributing to discussions. But it gave an entry-level talking point. And I wanted to be able to start with that and kind of have that open conversation about harder topics and, in my opinion, more important topics in terms of culture and politics, economics, just life. And so that's kind of where my brainchild started. And I don't know, what vision do you see moving forward
with
for all of this? Yeah.
I mean, I've mostly followed you because it's your baby.
Yeah.
And I'm just here for the ride, man. It's something I love both aspects of it,
Mm-hmm.
and getting to actually have a platform to talk about it in any way, however small, is just
yeah.
super
And
exciting.
a question I want to ask you is, okay, so why do you want to, or what part of government? I know you have extra credits, and so you wanted to be able to get into that and maybe have a future in that career-wise. But where do you see that going? What do you want to do with that? And why do you want to, like, obviously in both sports and politics, if you want to get into the business of it, you need some kind of resume builder.
Absolutely.
And so as much as you can do within both fields, the better.
Yeah.
Whether that's writing, whether that's researching, any kind of aspect. So is that where this comes from? What do you love about both of those?
Well, long term, my Instagram bio says aspiring or future general manager and aspiring vice president.
Okay.
That would be great. I know it's not realistic, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's the dream in terms of experience. I don't have a great plan in terms of building political experience.
Yeah.
I would like to, like I said, do a local government job at some point. But as Donald Trump has proven for us, you don't necessarily have to have experience in politics.
Yeah, you don't
necessarily. You need experience in other ways.
Right. And
but
that's the thing is, at least the way I see government, and this may start getting a little bit more like personal political views, which I'm fine with.
Oh yeah.
The main part of government is to allow the people to live their lives to the best of their ability and to their desires. It's to take a step back and just create a very loose framework for the rules that they have to operate under.
And one thing that I've recently been just thinking about is Ben Shapiro in his book,
The Right Side of History.
Right Side of History.
Yeah,
Great book. He says that the purpose of government is to enable you to have the pursuit of happiness. It's not the pursuit of happiness itself.
Yeah.
Now, for me, enabling other people to have the pursuit of happiness is one way I get happiness in terms of politics. Like,
sure.
I actually take pleasure in political discussions.
Yeah.
I enjoy writing bills. Like in high school, I would write bills, like that type of stuff.
Sure.
I get excitement out of that.
Yeah.
But that he is right. It's not the only thing, and it's simply there to service the citizens in their endeavors. And,
I mean, ultimately, moving forward, you talk about you want to be a general manager and then move somehow into politics. I feel like there's a lot that you can do with that. The sports give you the live aspect in terms of you have to deal with fans and polling and it gives you the experience with the business and managing a very large entity now in government that's more public funds. That's the United States. That's, if you go federal, it's the country as a whole. If you go more local, it's the city, it's county, whatever it is. But in the private sector, it's sporting, whatever. If you go smaller, you have gyms and that kind of local workout stuff, high schools.
Yeah, schools.
But the bigger you go, the more you get to just this massive organization that is technically private, but it starts taking public funding.
Oh, yeah.
It starts becoming more and more of just this conglomerate of public passion, but a private organization. So
Yeah,
it gets murky really fast.
Yeah, if you're on the business side of sports, the correlations are very similar in terms of government. It's all a business at the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's all a business.
And that's the thing is, like, with government, as much as people want it to be more of a moral leader,
it's not.
It's more supposed to be a business in terms of these are the economic frameworks that we operate under, and these are, okay, people need some kind of health care or something.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's impossible
Somehow.
to legislate morality, so don't even try.
Yeah. That's a really good point. That's why I wanted to start the podcast as a whole, is because it's really hard to legislate morality, but you want to be able to affect some kind of change in culture. And so the best way to affect change, at least from my perspective, is to affect passion. And once you affect passion with sports, you can start moving towards, okay, this is a cultural change, but then there's some kind of policy change that we need too. So there's both aspects that you need. I'm going to save this.
In terms of, you said, affecting change through passion, I feel like even more so than that is one-on-one relationships.
Yeah.
And that's something you want to do to then influence athletes who then can influence passion. So I feel like you're pulling on both aspects with what you want to do.
Yeah, and I want to be able to affect platforms as a whole. And honestly, I probably won't get that opportunity myself. I'm not talented enough as an athlete. I've done a little bit of music here and there. I'm not a good enough musician. There's no part of celebrity that I will be walking into at any point. But that doesn't mean that I don't have a chance to influence other people who have a larger platform.
Be the next Scott Boras and
Yeah.
be a savage.
Savage
agent.
And that's the thing is, my heart broke when I started reading about how many athletes just ruin their lives after they get off of the field for no reason other than they were unequipped or ill-prepared to make moral, correct decisions.
Yeah. And a lot of them mess themselves over during their time playing, too.
Yeah.
Just
And
celebrity life.
as much as you can't necessarily control everybody, and you can't necessarily, as you say, necessarily legislate moral behavior, I feel like anyone that has a one-on-one connection has a better opportunity to change someone's life than someone that has an overall, just overarching view of the situation.
And we're not seeking to control, but to influence.
Exactly.
And that gives them the opportunity and the knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah. So, what do you see moving forward for the site? What are your next articles? What do you want to
Next articles.
start talking about? What I think so. I'll give my perspective. The next podcast that I want to record, or at least somewhere down the line, is start giving the reasoning behind where I see the exact correlations between sports and politics, because it's been brought to my attention and I've really been mulling it over for the last couple weeks. The topic of the eye test in sports and how that's very subjective, which is why a lot of people don't see the correlation between sports and politics. And ultimately, I wish that the two would stay as two separate entities. But you see more and more athletes wanting to get into social justice initiatives because they want to do something with their platform.
Which is fine, yeah.
It's great. I am all for it. But you have to put in the research and learn the information, have the knowledge to go with that passion. It's it's severely lacking.
Passion without knowledge can lead to chaos.
Yeah,
Very
absolutely.
very
And
easily.
so it's one of those things where you want to have some kind of, I don't know, control in terms of how to influence someone the best way possible. So yeah, I want to start talking about why it's not just an eye test in sports and why there is this correlation between sports and politics and, I mean, like you say, economics or business law, more and more culture, just society as a whole.
I have a question for you in terms of what you want to do.
Yeah.
You want to be an agent.
I do.
And you want to have influence on them. How are you going to be able to do business with them and then also talk politics, especially with people that disagree with you?
So I don't think you start with the politics. One of the parts of being an agent that I like is a lot of the terminology is moving kind of away from being a sport agent and being a player representative. And there are differences, like those are two separate things. But as a representative, you have to represent the interests of the players themselves, but you also have to understand where they're coming from. So you have to build a relationship. And so ultimately it's a business and you represent exactly what the player wants. But you also have a chance to have those conversations and to start making them think about, okay, why do I believe what I believe? And even if I disagree with someone, I'm fine with representing their beliefs as long as they've thought through why they believe what they believe. And I'll make it very well known where I stand in terms of where I disagree and where I agree. But I'll also make it well known that I respect their opinion, because you don't necessarily have to agree with someone as long as it's not some kind of fundamental core issue. Morally speaking, there will be moral conflicts. I am conservative, I'm a Christian. Those are parts of just who I am. But that doesn't mean that I would want nothing to do with people who don't hold those same value systems. I think that's what makes our society so great, is that we can have those conversations, at least right now. Free speech in America is still protected, thankfully. For now.
Hopefully.
And you see that changing throughout the world. You see certain people in the United States talking about hate speech and
on campuses, you are
not being allowed to say something that might be controversial. And
considering it violence is just insane to me. I mean, people clearly don't know the definition of violence, first of all.
I would agree.
And then
and so it's one of those things where even if I disagree with someone, I want to bring conversation back to the world. And that's what this site is supposed to be about.
Yeah, and lots of times if you even have a conversation, that's considered bad. And that's just...
And
it just discourages any type of productivity.
You can look at specific examples, and I could give specific examples of what you're talking about with that. And maybe at some point I will, in terms of some article, some podcast. But I don't really want to beat the dead horse in this. I really want to...
If you watch the news, you know what's happening.
Exactly. And so I want people to be able to go into any kind of situation and be willing to have that conversation, even if it's a hard conversation, even if it's something where you know that someone will disagree with you. That doesn't mean you stop caring about people. You can have a conversation about the topic and the subject, but that doesn't have to mean that you hate the person.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many people are losing that nowadays, which is why I want this site to be something where, okay, you can laugh and joke and give your opinions about sports, but you can also laugh and joke and give your opinions about politics. Because the thing is, I love the political game. It's something that is annoying at times, and you hate the dishonesty of it. But there is a certain amount of gamesmanship, and anyone that watches Twitter or watches the news or anything of that effect, it makes you dislike people because of their visceral hatred for others and their personal attacks. But there is a certain amount of gamesmanship involved in terms of the trollery on Twitter. And I mean, some of it is not necessarily in good fun, but for the rest of us outside looking in, you can appreciate the humor of it at least a little bit.
And to go back to your point about separating like the arguments from the person, there's a reason that ad hominem is considered a logical fallacy.
Yeah.
You can't tie the two together. And if you hate a person just because they have an opinion, it's...
Can you define ad hominem?
Ad hominem is discrediting something because, or discrediting a person because of who they are, not what they're saying.
Right. Right. And that's the thing is, what a lot of people, at least in my circles, hate about politics is all of the negative personal attack ads and the personal vendettas against certain politicians from other politicians. And obviously it's becoming more and more visceral just based off of who our current president is, how far the other side is starting to go in the opposite direction of going away from a lot of even their central values that they had 15 years ago. Everything is becoming more and more polarized, and our current president is a lot more polarized than I ever imagined we'd have on the right. And there are certain stances that he takes on, say, the tariff policies that he was pushing a while back. At one point, that was a very left stance, but
I mean,
now
even
the
as
current,
simple as the wall was a left stance at one point.
at one point, yeah, as 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. Clinton.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things where times are changing, but there's not necessarily anything new under the sun. I mean, sports and politics always intermingled. You look back to the, 38 Olympics, where Jesse Owens destroyed Hitler's perfect human.
Yep.
And then you go to civil rights and you go to women's rights. There are a lot of good things that have come out of the combination of sports and politics, but I think at this point we've made a lot of the advancements that we needed to. Everyone, at least politically speaking, has free speech. Everybody can vote. Everybody can work wherever they want. Everybody is being hired. Demographically, it's an equal opportunity environment at this point. And so...
And opportunity is what matters, not outcome. People get all uppity about the outcomes being different, but if you're not qualified... I'm going to go off on a rant here, but anyhow.
Oh, no, please. No. Go for it.
Just, yeah, I'm going to stop there. If equal opportunity, if you lose in the opportunity, that's your fault, not the system's fault.
Yeah, I would agree. I would very much agree.
I had a question for you about, influence. But how do you influence people that don't even want to talk about politics? Because I know I have friends that just don't even want to talk about the subject at all.
At that point, you have to pick and choose your battles. So, obviously, I have other interests, namely sports. And so, from what I've seen, if there's something that needs to be talked about, which very rarely do you actually need to talk about politics. There are certain times where you're in a public platform and or they are going into some kind of public platform and you need to have that dialogue and at that point usually they're willing to have it. But going back to your question, I generally start with sports, and then if I want to move into topics about political issues, I mean, you start with Colin Kaepernick, you start with...
Yeah, it's not too hard. If you're on sports, you can segue right into politics.
Yeah, and so if you actually want to have that conversation, that's a pretty easy way. If not, I don't think you necessarily have to talk about politics. I think you start talking about moral issues. I think you start talking about what you see wrong in the world. And then you can start kind of relating that back a little bit, because I think politics gives a pretty decent snapshot into those morals and what people really believe in and why they believe what they believe. And that's always my big question is, okay, why? Why this? Why do you feel that way? Why is this policy in place? What is the reasoning behind it? Going back to the logic and the critical thinking and all of the research, because a lot of people don't necessarily know why they believe what they believe. They just know that it makes them uncomfortable, and they don't necessarily know why, and they haven't thought through it.
Or they're just grown up that way.
Or they've just grown up that way, and that's, at least at our stage of life, that's more of a thing. As you get older and you talk to more and more people who are even 5-10 years older than us, starting to get closer into the millennial generation, away from the Generation Zs. You start getting people who at least have thought through it a little bit, but maybe haven't fleshed out their ideas fully. So
Have their own enlightenment period.
their own enlightenment. Yeah.
What's your favorite teams?
Oh yeah, we should hit that. Favorite football team. I'm huge into football. That's my goal, is to be an NFL sports agent. So I love the Indianapolis Colts. I grew up as a Hoosier in the great state of Indiana. Because of that, I'm a marginal Pacers fan. They're not great. I've never really cared about them. When they do well, I'm like, okay, good for Indiana. I've been a Steph Curry fan since Davidson, so I will say I am a Golden State fan.
Is there anyone even good on the Pacers anymore?
Victor Oladipo, who got hurt.
He's good at defense.
Yeah. And then I grew up, when I was little, I was definitely a Lakers hater. So Boston Celtics fan. When they had the big three of Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Rajon Rondo, Big Baby Davis, all those guys. And then baseball, my dad's side are huge Cardinals fans. My mom's side are Cubs fans. And so I have a good time with both of them.
Great combination.
Yeah, I get to play both sides a little bit. Get under people's skin, which is pretty fun.
Do you prefer one over the other?
I don't. I think they're both.
You're just saying that.
I think they're both decent organizations. I think the Cardinals have the history of success.
Historically, they're both very good.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals have the history of success. I will say I've never been happier than when the Cubs broke the curse, mainly because I'm a big fan of being alive during history.
Yeah.
And so I thought that was just really good for the sport in general. Hockey, I don't know much. I'm a Caps fan because I'm here, and most everyone around here are Caps fans.
Okay.
I also like Chicago Blackhawks because that's the team that was closest to me growing up. But I haven't followed it closely, so I will plead ignorance on that.
I got you.
What about you?
Wait, college teams?
College teams, I've always been more of a players guy. So I go to Liberty University. We're now Division I FBS, so now I've got to be a huge Liberty fan as we move forward. But growing up, I was a huge Tebow fan, so I was Florida Gators for a while. I had the opportunity to meet Jameis Winston and have him coach a 7-on-7 tournament when I was in high school. So for those couple of years, I was a Florida State fan.
How you feel about him now?
Morally, I don't really know. I think he's just immature.
Very.
I think that's also behind him just based off of timelines of when all of his most recent stuff happened. I mean, at that point,
It's like 3 years ago.
it's 3, 4. I think we're pushing 5 years on most of it. But as a player, I think he's underrated, and I think the Buccaneers coaching staff has been in shambles for a while. But they're not a huge market team, so nobody really pays attention to it. College basketball, I've loved Butler ever since Gordon Hayward almost made a half-court shot to beat Duke in the national championship.
See, I hate Butler.
Why?
Because of VCU.
Because of VCU. Interesting. Okay.
That wasn't a very exciting year, and then y'all ended it, so...
Yeah.
Didn't appreciate that.
But no, I grew up a Butler fan. Other than that, I will cheer for Indiana teams, just being a homer. And then I really do follow players closely. I love player talent, and that... So this is side note, but I get very annoyed about people talking about bandwagon fans. Because I feel like there's a difference between people who jump on the bandwagon just because teams are suddenly good versus people who jump on a bandwagon just because a player moved from one team to another and you're a fan of that player. I feel like those are two very different mindsets, and I've always been someone who will be like, hey, I've loved this player on this team for a long time, and now he's going to play with another player that I love, so naturally my love for that specific team is going to grow a decent amount. So that's a pet peeve of mine that people will yell at me about. But
That's valid.
yeah. So what about you?
All right, so for baseball, which is my primary sport, Orioles.
I'm
Just
sorry.
It's okay. Only because historically the Nationals didn't even exist when I was born. So I inherited a lot of my teams from my dad, Orioles. But then secondarily, I will cheer for the Nationals.
Okay.
And tertiarily, the Pirates.
Pirates.
Because
Interesting.
my dad's family was from Pittsburgh originally, so.
I can be a Pirates fan because the one minor league team by me is the feeder team of the Pirates. So
Triple.
Yeah, AAA Indianapolis Indians.
Okay.
So we feed into the Pirates, which is fun.
But yeah, diehard Orioles. If they play Pirates or Nationals, all in on the Orioles. Except for last year, I cheered against them very hard because I wanted the first overall pick, which we got.
That's fair.
Football, my second sport, Redskins.
Okay.
Despise the Ravens. Love the Orioles, but despise the Ravens.
Okay.
Because secondarily, I like the Steelers.
Okay.
So both Redskins and Steelers hate the Ravens. When Peyton Manning got traded to the Broncos, I picked up the Broncos.
So did I. I will
Broncos are my-
fully admit that.
Broncos
Yeah.
are my third favorite team, but they're definitely far down.
See, and I also loved the Broncos because I was Tebow fan, and so basically the Broncos kicked off Tebow when they brought in Peyton. And
I used to very much dislike the Broncos because Tebow eliminated the Steelers in the playoffs
Yep.
that year.
Yup.
As a Steelers
It's a
fan,
good time.
not a fan, but that's football. Basketball, suffering Wizards fan. Since we traded Kelly Oubre Jr. to the Suns, I kind of like the Suns because I love Kelly Oubre Jr.
Yeah.
Admittedly, a bandwagon Golden State fan.
Okay.
Just because
I mean,
I like Steph Curry. So
you love history, and
they're going to win again this year, so that'll be cool.
I don't know about that.
They're going to win.
They're
They're going to beat the Clippers.
they're going to beat the Clips, but I mean the
Houston.
Houston Rockets look real good, and I don't know. We'll see.
Boogie getting hurt didn't help, but
No, it didn't. It did not at all.
hockey full on caps. And only one team in hockey. College, of course, Liberty. I mean, I work for the baseball team, so
Yeah.
love those guys. But then I've always been a Maryland fan.
Okay. Yeah.
We're not great at anything except lacrosse and women's basketball, but
Which I mean, you're very
Very good at those.
Good at both of those.
Yeah.
So
men's and women's lacrosse.
Yeah.
So that's my whole bias, all my teams.
nice. Yeah, and I guess while we're going over biases, I mean, I'll fully admit that. Well, not admit. I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah.
I will say that morally, like from a social perspective, I lean conservative. From a policy wise, I lean more conservative libertarian mix. And so anything that I write is definitely coming from that angle. But I care about research and will take the time to look at both sides of an issue and try to evaluate it as fairly as humanly possible. I don't think that's one thing that really I struggle with in terms of journalism today is the concept of being completely unbiased reporting. There's a difference between being able to write an unbiased article and unbiased reporting.
It's virtually impossible.
It's very, very difficult. And I feel like too many people, because they feel like there should be this unbiased reporting, they hide their biases and they try to push away and deny that there's any kind of leaning any direction towards a political party. But pretty much everyone, at least if you're having to report on politics, you know politics and you have some kind of opinion.
Yeah.
And so just be upfront about that. That it's okay to be honest in those kind of situations. So I feel like that's being lost. So those are our sports biases. Anything we talk about comes from that. But we're both in sport business, so you have these are our fan interests, but also there's the business side that we want to talk about and address. So, past that, politically, that's where I think we both stand. I don't know.
Well, yeah, basically it's the same, but like one of my major lenses I look through anything through is the Constitution, and when I talk to people about something and like I bring up that it's unconstitutional and they don't care, I don't know how to respond to someone that doesn't care about the Constitution, because it's what drives our country. Without it, we're nothing different than anybody else. It's something that's very important to me, and it bothers me when other people don't care about it.
So you're a constitutional originalist.
Very much so.
And how much do you feel like it should be interpreted?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot, not at all.
There's not much need. Obviously, technological advances require some things to be interpreted.
Okay.
But
yeah,
when it says something, you go with it.
And
that doesn't mean you can't amend it.
Yeah.
That's why they put that in there.
That's true.
But if you're going to do something unconstitutional, make it constitutional first.
I mean, and that's what makes our country great. It's not necessarily the people. It's not our history. There's not much that makes America special other than coming here and buying into our principles and the structure that our founders gave us.
Not last year, I was bored, so I wrote a paper about gun control. Might edit it and put it on the site.
Gun control?
Yeah. Okay. And my final point was, everything I said points to why we shouldn't ban guns. But even if we do, let's amend the Constitution first, so at least we're doing it the right way.
Yeah. Because
if you violate... There's a quote I love from Thomas Jefferson. I think I still have it memorized. A departure from principle in one instance is precedent for a second, that second for a third, and so on, till the bulk of society is reduced to mere automations of misery, to have no sensibilities left but for sinning and suffering. So if you keep violating that principle, the next time it becomes easier. And not to say we haven't ever violated the Constitution, because we have.
Yeah.
Plenty of times.
Okay.
But the more we stick to it, the better we can actually uphold it.
Yeah. And it becomes very difficult to amend the Constitution nowadays, and I think that's the counter argument to why you don't.
Well,
but I don't think that makes it okay.
Yeah, if it's so important, then it will get it.
Yeah,
you know.
Exactly. And so that's us being upfront. I hope people appreciate that. I really want this site to be transparent, and to not have any kind of darkness or questioning behind it. And I'm hoping that, as volatile as society is, people will appreciate that. Being upfront about biases, to me, is very important. Being upfront about caring about the truth, about caring about morals. Even if you don't necessarily agree with us, hopefully you can at least respect that we're trying to do it the right way and going about it in the most intellectually honest way possible.
And that's something you can see with some prominent conservative, like Ben Shapiro, Stephen Crowder. There's lots of times that people that completely disagree with them but respect them immensely because the way they handle themselves.
And there are people on the other side of that.
Oh yeah, it's both sides.
Yeah, you mean like Sam Harris or who stays more out of the political sphere, but there are people on both sides that try to remain intellectually honest, and they just honestly care or have different views on less social and more policy stances. And as long as they have the reasoning to back it up, then you can have that conversation that's so important. And I really appreciate that. Yeah. All of that said, my name is Jonas Wells.
Matthew Denmeyer.
Welcome to the first video podcast, and honestly just a conversation with you guys, the audience, about Well Done America, the podcast about sports culture and society as a whole, and just where our goals are and how we see the future going. So there's a little bit of our past, hopefully a little bit of our future, and I hope you guys enjoy the ride as much as we do.